Hello, we are with Pamela Parks. Hi, Pamela.
Hello, how are you doing?
Excellent. So she's one of our members of the Educators Network. She's writing a book about different language teaching methods, and she can talk for probably months, but she's gonna show us a little brief explanation of what these main methods for teaching languages are. So, okay, Pamela, what's the first method that you are going to talk about?
So I thought that we would just briefly go over the top pedagogical methods, and we're with the one I think everybody knows, everybody uses all the time, which is total physical response. And that's often abbreviated as TPR. So total physical response is supposed to, it was created in order to facilitate this silent period that students have. Students are usually a little too shy to start speaking immediately. So this method was developed to kind of respect that silent period and to get students more active and engaged to begin with. And it's supposed to be what's total physical response. So the method, you start off by giving commands: stand up, sit down, walk to the door, and then you can make it more complicated. Everybody stand up, sit down. You get your volunteers to come to the front and they give commands. And then you get it more and more complicated as you go on. Okay, class, if Bob stood up, then everybody clap your hands. And it gets more complicated like that. If this total physical response, TPR, has trickled out to all of our other teaching methods. I am always pleased when my colleagues in the math department say, oh, I'm doing this TPR thing. Oh, the English department is doing a TPR, but when it trickled out, it kind of got watered down a bit. So you'll see it like this in other classes. Just, hey, let's get the students more active. You got to link the physical movement to something tangible. So I don't know, if your body parts is an easy one to start with, okay? So whenever you say the word head, students have to point to their head, or whenever you say the word arm. Or if you want them to know the word, I don't know, remember, they'll point to their head, get them stand up, get them sit down, just however you can link it together.
Do you have any personal experience of using it?
Oh yeah, all the time. We try, okay, I have a great game I invented. I was subbing for a drama teacher and we were playing charades, and I was thinking, well, there's a lot of people being passive, and so I brought it back to my class. And I teach the top 50 verbs in whatever language I'm teaching. I teach 3 languages. I teach the top 50 verbs by frequency because I think that's important for the students to know. And then we do like a reverse charades where the students have decided what symbol stands for what verb, okay? So the one they love the most is to go out, in whatever language we're doing, to go out. So one student draws a card and, oh, he's drawn the card to go out. So he gets up and leaves the room, and everybody, a little prop here, everyone has little whiteboards, the best I ever bought with my money, little whiteboards and markers, and they write what they think the verb is, and they show it to me, and if I say yes, then they get up and they do it with him. Soon all 30 students are doing the exact same pantomime motion to remember what the word is. Now, I love that the most.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's total physical response.
All right, so the next one, I think you're going to talk to the grammar translation method.
You want to do that one next? Sure.
Yes, you want me to share the screen for that?
So I'm going to start talking while you share the screen. The grammar translation method gets a bad rap nowadays. It's a very old-fashioned method. It's very old school. But let me implore you to think about putting it in your class for just brief amounts of time, because look, I'm a nerd. The whole reason I learned other languages was so that I could read more. Think about all the amazing literature that's available in other languages. And maybe it's a little beyond your students' abilities, but with the grammar translation method, you can bring really classic, good, solid literature to your students. So grammar translation method doesn't really worry about staying in the target language, and that's why many people don't like it right now, because everyone's trying to stay in the target language as much as possible. But frankly, this is the method I used when I was a professional translator. So there's a lot of use for it in the workforce if you want to get that CTE component, that career and technical education component into your class. This is a good way to do it. So you give the students a little excerpt, and here I've got a little fairy tale. And you can see I have underlined and footnoted some words that I think the students are going to have trouble with. Now,
Right.
the more you read, this is like the best way to learn vocabulary. The absolute best way to learn vocabulary is through reading, because everything is connected, and we'll talk about that in a minute with comprehensive input. But there are like lots of research done on how reading is the best way to learn vocabulary. Far better than flashcards, far better than lists.
Right.
Reading keeps it in context. So I don't want the students to really slow down when they're reading, so I'll often give them hints as to what certain words are. So here I've got a footnote, number 1, to remind the students that it's an imperfect tense. Number 2, my colleagues upstairs in the English language department always give a spelling word as raconteur, and here's a raconte, which comes from that word. We'll have already finished reading Tintin, the comic book, so they'll recognize a couple of words from that, just reminding the students of passé composé. So this is how I do grammar translation method, because I do feel that there's a place for it in the classroom. So that's grammar translation in a nutshell.
You told me that you have an experience with your Japanese class for this.
Oh, with all my classes, I do this in all my classes. Specific experiences, they love to read. And the thing I love to read is stuff that they're not going to find in English. I don't like to do translations. I like to do really authentic, very authentic literature. And I do a little book talk. I have a bunch of books, and I throw them on the table, and I say, guys, come up, look at the books, touch them, open them, let me tell you what this is about, let me tell you what this is about. And then we vote on the book, so everyone has a real buy-in to what we're reading. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Should I stop sharing this screen?
Yep. Okay, we can go back to other stuff.
Okay. So the next one you're going to talk is the direct method, right?
Right, the direct method. Oh, I love the direct method. Direct method is exactly as it sounds. You stay in the target language. You never translate. You never succumb to translation. No translation allowed. So it's kind of backwards of the grammar translation method.
Going back to childhood.
Yeah. So you start with a story. You can choose any story you want, and you read it aloud to the students. Now, usually there's a little bit of a popcorn reading where you randomly call on students to read, and that's really fallen out of favor. So what I do is choral reading, where I'll read a line and I'll have the students repeat it. That gets them all pronouncing and everything. But when you read, you get super hammy. Just go over the top acting. I've got a million props. I've got, whatever I need. Little Duolingo plushie, and he goes along and he does things in the story. Like if somebody's taking a drink in a story, he can take a drink, and then the kids know what's going on. You project it on the board so you can write all over it and circle adjectives and point to nouns and everything. And it's beautiful. You get really hammy. Then what you do is you ask the students after the story, you say, do you have any questions? But you ask that in the target language, of course. Now, here's the crucial part, is the students are going to be super shy because they're worried about speaking aloud. They're worried about not being able to finish a sentence. So you'll get somebody who raises their hand, and then they immediately put it down. You need to use a no opt-out strategy. A no opt-out strategy is you do not let the students off the hook. You keep pressing them until they say something, anything. Have posters around the room that say, how do you say blah, blah, blah in the language you're teaching, all right? So you can always point to that and say, comment dit-on, what in français, or comment se dit, whatever. And then, so the students can use that as a crutch. Make sure they finish their sentence. Let them know the whole class is helping them construct their sentence, because other students will start chiming in with stuff. Don't let them off the hook until they've said something. Repeat it back to them. Have them say it again. Have the whole class repeat it. And then be patient when you have to answer the exact same question 4 times, because everyone's picking it up at different rates. Smile and answer the same question all over again. Make the whole class repeat it again. And then you can really get into the nitty-gritties of the story. The students are asking questions about it, you're asking them questions about it. With the direct method, you always want to use some kind of story that has a lot of culture in it, so you could teach the culture at the same time. So that's a really exciting method.
We talk about this before, and yes, and I totally agree with you that culture, you don't just teach the language.
Oh yeah, you cannot take culture outside of language. They have to be connected.
I agree. So let's see, what do you have to tell us about the comprehensive input?
Okay, so I wasn't thinking about comprehensible input as a method. I was thinking of it as a foundational guiding principle. But our colleague, Kathy Schock, mentioned comprehensible input and that she'd like it included. And I said, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and conclude it. So to me, there are 4 guiding principles to language acquisition, all right? The first we talked about a little bit with total physical response. That's silent period, where the students are kind of absorbing everything, and it's going to take them a while before they can make an utterance because they're kind of making sense of it in their mind. That's called the silent period. The second, which is related to the silent period, and we're going to talk about that more in depth with 2 other methods, this is called the affective filter. Now, a filter prevents things from getting to you, and the affective filter in linguistics terminology is that little voice inside your head that says, oh, I better not say arre out loud, I'm going to sound stupid. So the students shut down before you can get them to say anything. So we need to work on the silent period, which we have to respect. We have to give the students that time to parse things, okay? We need to respect the affective filter, which is the students shutting down. We got to try and get the students to lower that affective filter. The next guiding principle is N+1. N is the amount of language that you know, +1 is just a teeny bit outside of your comfort zone. So if you're working at N+0, that's the amount of language you know, and there's no learning going on. It may be boring for you. N-5, oh, you're bored to tears. There's absolutely nothing new going on. You're speaking baby sentences. N+20, you're frustrated. You can't understand anything, and you shut down just out of frustration. So N+1, N+2, just a teeny bit out of your comfort zone. Comprehensible input, to me, is another guiding principle. You want to make sure that every word you're teaching makes sense, okay? That there's some way to understand it. You're learning it and you comprehend it. That's comprehensible input. And really the best way to do that is through reading, because all the words are connected to each other. But it also means you're using all kinds of mnemonic strategies. You're using the keychain method where you don't teach the word dog and the word skyscraper. You have to put them together somehow. Teach all the food words at once, teach all the clothing words at once, teach all the color words at once, teach all the conjugations of a verb at once. So, and whatever weird connections you can make, just keep it so that everything is understandable and nothing's being taught in a bubble. That's comprehensible input.
That's creating a network, neurological network of sense.
Exactly.
And how about the audio-lingual method?
Okay, the audio-lingual method has been around a really long time. And you start with a script. So you've written a script or you found a script, usually with 2 people. And what you do is you go through choral reading with your class, the script. And you've got the students repeating everything, and maybe they don't understand all of it because you're entirely in the target language. But let's say you've got a really complicated sentence in the script. You're like, I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. And you have the students repeat that, and the students kind of stumble over it. So then you break the sentence down. I come, and the students repeat, I come. I come from Alabama, and the students repeat, from Alabama. I come from Alabama with a banjo, and maybe the students stumble again, so you break it down even further, with a banjo, and you draw a picture, or you have a prop or something.
Is that Daddy Yankee? Is it?
You just gotta break it down for them, okay? Then once they have the whole script, maybe you read person A and have the class repeat person B, and then you swap it so that everyone's working with the script. Okay, now you get to do the really fun stuff where you're really picking it apart, and you do substitution drills and transformation drills. So a substitution drill is where you take the sentence and you change out a word. So I come from Montana with a banjo on my knee. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my elbow, you know, or whatever. You just put it in.
Right.
Inflection drills are, you're going to be changing the sentence to, usually you're inflecting the verb somehow. I came from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I will come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Alabama is where I came from. All right. So, and then it gets really tricky because sometimes you want to take out 2 or 3 things. And then you get the students to talk to each other. Do you come from Alabama with a banjo on your knee? No, I come from Montana with a piano on my elbow. And it gets, you can really play with the script and everything. It's a lot of fun.
That sounds so much fun.
They're all fun. A little bit of everything is fun.
Yeah, and it also connects with the comprehensible input.
And they should all. Any method worth its salt has to have respect for the silent period, lowering the effective filter, working at n+1, and using comprehensible input. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Let's talk about the communicative approach.
Okay, the communicative approach. The main philosophy behind this is that social context is the most important factor in learning a language. The whole reason to learn a language is because of the social context. That the speaker and the listener are constantly negotiating meaning.
I like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a different approach. It's very interesting. You give a brief text to the students, and the text should have repeated grammatical points that you want them to work on. And the teacher's going to ask in the target language for the students to paraphrase the text. So, you know, they'll circumlocute, they'll talk around it, they'll use other words. And the really fun part is all the role play that goes on with this technique. Generally, the role play is going to be a little lopsided in power because you're negotiating the meaning. So we've got usually like...
You are there, sorry.
Oh.
Okay, let's take a pause.
Okay.
So I probably will have to fix this, but yeah, so you were telling me about the communicative approach,
Mm-hmm.
and you said it was like very fun, and then it can like...
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me start again. I'll just start from the top. Okay. So the main tenet behind the communicative approach is the social context and this negotiation of meaning between the speaker and the listener. So you have a brief text that you give to the students, and they paraphrase the text. So it's all in the target language. You always want to work in the target language as much as possible, except for the grammar translation method. That's the only one. But you're working in the target language, and you have the students paraphrase the text, use other words to talk about the text, use whatever words they can. And then the really, really fun part about this is all the role play you get to do. Usually there's an imbalance of power because you're working with this concept of you're negotiating meaning between the speaker and the listener. So you'll either give your students something very structured or something very unstructured, where you're like, oh, you're the boss of a company, and you, Bob, you're an employee, you want a raise, talk to your boss and try to get a raise. You're the teacher, Sarah, and Fred, you're the student, talk to each other and say you want less homework. So it's that kind of negotiating of meaning. Then there's a lot of games with this method. The more games you play, you lower that effective filter. The effective filter that's going to make the student shut down before they try to do anything. Because when you're playing a game, you're not paying attention to how you sound, you're just trying to win the game, right? So whenever I'm inventing a game for this, I use the mnemonic. I don't know if you know the rhyme, who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? Who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? I think that in my head. Because who stole the cookie? There's an information gap. You need to figure out who did it, okay? What's that information? And then there's a choice the students have to make. Is it Bob or is it Mary? Okay, so then they say, Mary stole the cookie from the cookie jar. That's their choice. So we've got information gap, choice, and then you need feedback. Feedback is who, me, yes, you, couldn't be, then who. So I put that in my head so that whenever I'm making a game, I just run through that and then I can come up with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So let's talk about the community. Oh, I have a slide here.
Oh, yes.
Community language learning. Let me share this. Okay, here we go. What's that about?
So I just threw together a little graphic with clip art because I just wanted you to envision students sitting in a circle. So again, community language learning is one of those methods that deals with lowering the affective filter. That is the main thing. We've got to get that affective filter lowered so that the students will start using the language. So you think of yourself as being a language counselor, and the teacher is outside the circle. The teacher does not come inside the circle. Eventually, somebody in the circle is going to want to say something. They're going to say, I like pineapples. So the teacher goes around behind that student and like over their shoulder and teaches them how to say, I like pineapples. I like pineapples. And the student will repeat it as many times as he needs until he feels like he's got it. Now, when he's got it, okay, when I first started 100 million years ago, we used tape recorders with cassette tapes in them. But now it's so amazing because we've got cell phones and we've got computers that can immediately record things. So you hand the student some kind of voice recorder, and the student says into it, I like pineapples. And they make sure that the student is happy with how that sounds, okay? Mm-hmm. Then somebody else will say, me too, I like pineapples too. So you go around behind that student and you say, me too, and you coach them how to say that line. And maybe somebody else will say, did you see that movie about pineapples? And you go behind them and you lather, rinse, repeat until everybody has said what you want to say. And you've got a script to work from. Okay, now at this point, the teacher gets to go into the middle of the circle. But all the teacher's doing right now is validating the students. The teacher does not do any language teaching at all in the middle of the circle. The teacher says, how do you feel about this? And I guarantee you the students are going to say, I don't remember what I just said. And the teacher's like, that's okay. You were focused on the conversation, and that's what we want. Because the conversation is most important. So then you can play back the tape for them, and everyone will remember what they said, and you'll be able to put it on the board. You write it on the board, and then you can piece it together, and then you can play with it just like it's a script for any of the other methods. So that's community language learning in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very effective.
It's an interesting method.
Yes. And how about when you talk to me about Suggestopedia, it sounds so interesting.
Okay, you can take this slide off and we'll talk about Suggestopedia.
Okay.
Okay, Suggestopedia is very new age. It's very, very different. We talked about the affective filter, which the community language learning is lowering, and communicative approach lowers the affective filter by playing games. Suggestopedia is just about lowering that affective filter. That's the main focus of Suggestopedia. So the idea is that the students come to you and they're too nervous to speak, and you as the teacher, that's your job, is to get them to lower the affective filter, but the students have all this idea in their head about what language learning should be and what they should sound like, and it's bogging them down, so you need to de-suggest it. That's what that means. So my school has recently gone whole hog into mindfulness training. So this has been really good for me because we've been doing it a little bit in my classes whenever I sprinkle in Suggestopedia. First of all, you teach your students how to breathe, okay? And then you teach your students how to visualize. So this is all the stuff that every woman knows who's ever been through a pregnancy class, okay? You just have your students breathe slowly and visualize some pretty place. And I always do it where they're visualizing some place associated with the language I'm teaching. So if I'm teaching Japanese, they're visualizing some beautiful koi pond with the giant rocks in the middle of it symbolizing mountains and the big colorful koi. And if I'm doing I don't know, if I'm doing Spanish, I'll have them visualize someplace out in the desert in Nogales where I used to go. Or, you know, if it's French, I'll have them visualize some beautiful, immaculate French garden or whatever. But visualize someplace. Get them to breathe slowly, kind of very meditative, okay? Then you put on classical music. Now, when I'm teaching Japanese, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want them listening to Verdi while I'm teaching Japanese. So I always do some kind of very specific Japanese slow music, maybe a koto music, maybe something really symphonic from one of my favorite movies or something. But you know, for French, I'll put on some French music. For Spanish, I'll put on some Spanish music, but very, very slow. And then you read them the story or the script very slow and very calm. And then you put on faster music, and then you read them the script again, really hammy and over the top, just like for the direct method, which is super fun. Then you get the students up and you ask them easy yes, no questions, first of all, and then you have them mingle like they're at a party because that's more fun. Lots and lots of role play again, have them choose fake personas. And then when they're really comfortable with the script, you give them props, you give them costumes, and you have them act it out, but you really encourage them to be silly and over the top. That's Suggestipedia. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was the encyclopedia of suggestion.
Yeah. When I first saw the word Suggestipedia, I was like, what's this? It's different.
Okay. All right, so let's move into the silent way. I have a slide here. And there it goes. Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll have you take down the slide in a minute so I can show some more props for this. This one is a very, very, very different method. The tenet of the silent way is that language is not merely mimicry. It's not even for communication, it's for self-expression.
Okay.
So because it's self-expression, there's a lot of times in language classes you're having the students say things like, I eat bananas, I wake up at 5, and maybe the students don't eat bananas and they don't wake up at 5, but you've had them learn those sentences. Not in the silent way, because you want the students to be speaking truth about themselves.
I like that.
The students are in charge. The teacher is really just a facilitator. The learners are responsible for their own learning. They're going to have to test and retest hypotheses. They've got to have a really positive can-do attitude. So you might wonder, like, how much language can be taught with the silent way if the teacher's being mostly silent? The teacher doesn't have to be completely silent, but usually the teacher's pretty darn silent. It's surprising. There's a lot of language you can teach because the students are forced to say things and listen to themselves as they say things. You'll notice that this chart has a lot of different colors on it. And you do have to, there is a bit of a money outlay to buy these charts because they're all color-coded and each sound is correlated with a different color. So I'll take it down and I'll show some other things.
Do you want me to stop sharing this?
Yeah, stop sharing it and come back to camera. Okay, so the gentleman who developed this actually started with something called Cuisenaire rods, which is a math manipulative. He found them in a math class, and they were these colored rods. And mine just fell apart. There we go. So I'm a poor teacher, and I don't have the money to buy Cuisenaire rods. So I use these other math manipulatives that I put together. But, you know, they're all different lengths, and each color represents a different sound. So you get your students correlating the colors to the sounds, and eventually the teacher can just hold up the rods, can point to the poster, and have the students making these utterances. So it's a very, very different method. It takes a lot of training, more training than I have, but I do dabble in it. So it's interesting. They're all interesting methods.
They are. I think we got to the last one, right?
Yep, last one. Okay.
So the organic world language.
Yes, this is organic world language, which is often abbreviated OWL, which is a nice little tie-in.
Yes.
So organic world language, again, is based on lowering the affective filter, but more important, the silent period of students. If you're not careful, that can stretch out a really long time. Some people take 6 months before they can say anything. And my colleague, Senor Lawrence, is fond of saying, I only have 180 instructional hours a year. So as teachers, we try as quickly as possible to get past that silent period when the students don't want to talk. So in the organic world language, the first thing you see is you walk into the classroom, there's no furniture whatsoever. The idea is that a desk is a barrier to conversation. It gets in between two people speaking. All the students stand in a circle, just like community language learning. They're all standing in a circle, And there's a lot of sentence frames, a lot of turn and talk, a lot of questioning of each other. The teacher is really just a facilitator again, just like in the silent method. The teacher facilitates and usually chooses a student leader. The student leader has had time beforehand to think about what they want to do. So if it's not sprung on them or anything, but the student leaders really step up. No activity should take more than 10 minutes in organic world language. So there's a lot of brain breaks where, like, little fun games where you've been talking in the target language exclusively and you just need a brain break. Okay, so here's a hand clapping game or a ball bouncing game, something that makes both hemispheres of the brain fire at the same time. But there's a lot of celebration when students answer correctly, and it's pretty fun and pretty active the entire time, and students are standing and on their feet the entire time.
Why is it called WORD? What does the word WORD?
Organic world language, OWL, just like Duo.
Mm-hmm. Yes, just
but
like
it's not
Duo.
connected to Duolingo, so don't get confused if you hear somebody say it.
I know. Well, we already did one.
So what I'd like to do, because we went through these really super quickly, I'd like to open the conversation up to the Duolingo Educators Forum. When you do Duolingo, there's that little bar at the top and there's little word balloons at the top. So anyone who wants more information about these methods or has questions, or especially if they're an expert on any of these methods, I invite them to go to the Duolingo Educators Forum and put a post up about it, and we'll get the discussion, we'll get more people talking. One of the things I have absolutely loved the most about Duolingo is that you have given me a way to connect with other educators around the world. I'm working on a project with Linda Kaga and another Duolingo educator named Muriel, and we are just working on something and emailing back and forth and chatting on Slack, and it suddenly occurred to me, oh, I'm collaborating with people around the world. They're halfway around the world. How cool
I
is
know, isn't it cool? It's pretty
It is
awesome.
amazing. And Mr. Mitchell and I have a good conversation going right now, and Kathy Schock, and all of us on the Educators Forum. So yeah, I'd like to bring this to get more people involved. So please post on the Duolingo Educators Forum, and for those of you who are on the Slack channel, please post on the Slack channel, and I look forward to learning more from all of you and continuing the conversation.
Well, you just stole my last line, because I was thinking of like telling people these conversations are going on in Slack, in the Educators Network.
Yeah.
So, well, you said it, and that's great.
Well, you've given us a great platform. Yeah. I'm so energized.
We're trying to make it better.
Yep.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Pam. Like, let's stay here talking.
Sure.
But like, I think like the teachers already have like a good like paraphrases of like the 10 different methods. That's pretty awesome. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.